there's always a chance, but I am not particularly optimistic about it. From what it seems, the show doesn't plan on being what it was back in the first 3 seasons. Even the whole marketing campaign for season 5 seemed like they were there to advertise the more promiscuous aspect of the show, and I do not believe that the show will steer away from that trajectory. Once again, thank you for being here, and I will see you next time.
For the last time, here we go again. Yes, Elite indeed has finally met its end, after Netflix finally decided to stop dancing on its grave and decided that the 8th season would be its last. It would be in no way a stretch to say that since its inception back in 2018, the show had quite a journey, and during that time, it managed to garner attraction for both its skillful writing, as well as for more promiscuous and shallow endeavors. The show admittedly started out rather strong. It was a unique offering of a murder mystery wrapped around in a lavish teen drama, yet by the time the last season came, the prime days of Elite were long behind it. But why? Why was that the case? What exactly caused the downfall of Elite? This is the million-euro question, isn't it? And the answer to it really isn't just a mystery. It is the mystery. So with the 3rd season, it is clear that the cycle concludes. It is March of the year 2020 that the 3rd season drops. In May, there is a confirmation that the show is renewed for season 4. Well, how could that be? Season 3 was quite definitive in its finality, was it not? This period between seasons 3 and 4, I believe, is probably the most insecure moment in Elite's history. There are many paths that the show may take moving forward. The main storyline has been concluded, and a lot of old generation characters received their send-offs. There are a few leftover characters who continue to be students at the school, yes, but at the end of the day, they have an opportunity to do whatever they please. But it is this point here that would become pivotal in the show's history, an inflection point that, moving forward, redefined Elite. It established a period of before and a period of after. During the interseason period, we received character portraits. We received a date announcement, a trailer. If anything, what we saw was relatively promising. Nothing seemed off track. The show also did the Elite Week, each day building up to the release of the 4th season by releasing a short story. The short stories, I thought, were rather nice. The whole lead-up was rather promising, and the time came when season 4 did indeed release. Suddenly, the winds changed, the waves turned, from without as well as within, and thus began the after. The season begins with a flash forward. We see Guzman be questioned while that absurdly long fireworks show is raging in the background. We see a figure float in the water. As a hook, it works. Then we move on to the present day. The show introduces us to 3 new students, Ariadna, Patrick, and Menthea. The show also introduces their father, a CEO named Benjamin, who promises to bring in order to the school that has seemingly lost it through the past couple of years. I will compliment the season on these introductions. While the characters themselves are thrown in a rather haphazard way, you can see the rationale behind their introduction. They can be seen as a reversal of the original 3 characters that came in as new students into the school, only that they were not the underdogs, but rather had more influence than the other students. This introduces an interesting dynamic into the show, as it is now the pre-existing characters who have to deal with adjusting to a new dynamic. The direction to bring in order into the school is also quite natural. The decision to replace the former principal, after all that occurred in the school, seems reasonable. The 2nd episode sees the introduction of a royal prince. He fits in the overall theme of bringing characters that are above the existing ones. After all, he is a prince, he has royal blood, and no one really can compare to that. And overall, this is a natural direction to go into. We already saw the show going downwards in the power hierarchy, so it is logical for it to go upwards. What happens next is quite natural as well. The new characters begin mixing in with the old ones. The show uses one of the first conflicts within the season, Benjamin testing Samu and Omar, to showcase what this type of dynamic entails, because the old characters are left at the mercy of the new ones. The only way for them to deal with this new order is to mingle with the new characters. They cannot really bully their way into getting what they need, but they rather need to play into their whims to get what they need. Again, a great shakeup from the dynamic that was seen before. But this dynamic is sadly used for maybe 2 episodes, which is a shame because, and trigger warning for you all, this type of a setup again is great. Season 4, for all its faults, had a great beginning and conceptually worked, but the execution is extremely lacking. Let's look at the new arrivals of the season. Here we have a family unit of 3 children and a single father. They also happen to be rich. This on its own presents an interesting opportunity for character building. You see, one of the greater ironies of the season is that the father, in one of his very first scenes, preaches about
disciplina, excelencia, mérito.
If the season had good execution, this scene would have been borderline genius, because what we have within this family is nothing that is even close to either discipline, excellence, or merit. The idea of starting off the season with this character touting about these supposed values, while his own children come into the school and actually bring in the exact opposite, is great. It is a great piece of characterization for Benjamin. It does show a disconnect between him and his children, as well as a bit of a delusion, because his children do bring a lot of awareness to the table. One of the main criticisms surrounding the season was that it really steered deep into the obscenities and never really came back from it. I can see a way as to how exactly the show could have leveraged this to their advantage. Since their family is rich and also a mess, the show could have very easily used this characterization to display that there are quite different cultures at play here. From the older characters who are perhaps not as obscenely rich and not on the loose, and from the newer characters who bring in a bigger level of opulence as well as a bigger level of obscenity that the school has never really seen before. Just think about it. These kids from abroad, who had little to no real oversight or parenting, come in and bring a different kind of culture along with them. And that kind of is the case. One of the first things that happens is that Patrick invites Ander to a club and then begins doing certain stuff knowing that Ander is taken. In a way, these characters have a corrosive effect over what was already established. If you consider it from those terms, it is a really good irony that Benjamin was brought in to course correct the school, yet his very own parenting choices end up corrupting the school, which is wrapped around in even a greater irony considering how the season was perceived, because a lot of people do view it as quite a departure from what Elite was before. There are also the children themselves. What is interesting about that is we never really saw an entire family get entrenched into the school. This is the first time that a whole team of characters come in. Since they have the power and the money, they are rightfully portrayed as brats. What they present is an opportunity to mess with these old characters on a massive scale, a bit of a divide and conquer. We sort of see that in the first episode. What happens in the first episode is that once again, Omar and Samuel have to pass Benjamin's test somehow and find a way to stay at the school. Menthia suggests getting the exam cancelled by getting close to Ari. Guzman proceeds to go on a date with Ari, and afterwards Menthia and Ari get into an argument. Menthia, quite frankly, throws the old cast under the bus.
Guzmán ha quedado contigo para que le quiten el examen a esos dos de clase. Yo le di la idea.
The brattiness on display here is amazing. This little nugget is great because it shows just how fragile the old cast could be at the hands of these new kids. And it also shows that Menthia wasn't really doing this to be friends with the cast. She just kind of did it to spite her family. When you think about it, the petty whims of these characters are what breaks down a lot of what was established in the previous seasons. Again, they are corrosive to what was established. To have these characters come in and potentially divide and conquer their way through a cast that was previously shown to be unified through tragedy would have been an interesting direction to take. And I think that these characters could be this way because they are deeply traumatized by things they went through. Again, the actions of these kids are directly the result of parenting from Benjamin himself. They lost their mother at a very young age, which left them in very difficult positions. Ariadna was forced to become a mother to her siblings while her father didn't pull his weight. Patrick was bedridden due to the car accident that also killed his mom. Menthia carries guilt over what occurred. Their entire family is divided, which, if you tilt your head a little, these exact divisions permeate this entire season. These four characters alone could have worked, dare I say it, brilliantly. Conceptually, they are a perfect addition. Philip is also thematically in sync, an obscenely rich kid with no oversight, which leads to dreadful consequences. And all of this is why the last scene of episode 1, the reveal of the victim being Ari, is made all the more compelling. Of course, you cannot help but wonder what exactly went wrong. So what does the show ultimately do with all of this interesting setup and ideas? Nothing. At least, nothing of real substance. The overarching problem with this installment into the wider Elite saga is that this season feels rather forced. Sure, I think there were plenty natural and organic opportunities for progression, but Elite doesn't really use any of them this time around. For reasons unknown, it really wants to rush into things without taking a breather. For instance, it takes only 2 scenes for Menthia and Rebecca to begin making out, without them even having any proper connection. Similar path is taken with Philip and Cayetana. It only takes around a couple of scenes for the two of them to hook up. What I liked about Elite from the before is that personal connections took time to develop. The show didn't exactly rush into needless drama, relationships felt organic. Then of course comes the rather controversial decision to break up practically all of the pre-established relationships. In conjunction with that, the show also decided to invent more love triangles. I feel as though love triangles are trite as they are on their own. It is really an uninspired trope. But the show didn't introduce just one love triangle, it went with 2. I must admit that I myself never cared cared for ships or shipping anyone with anyone. I am not that type of person. You won't exactly see me in the trenches fighting over Carmuel or Gutnadia, but what I do care about is for relationships to be written coherently, logically, and simply well. What Season 4 decides to do, however, is insert the new characters between the old ones without any work around it whatsoever. One of the love triangles is between Guzman, Samuel, and Ari. What I dislike about this whole affair is that, in order to make it work, they proceeded to throw out Guzman's character development, as well as whatever friendship Samuel and Guzman had. If, and I truly mean only if, they actually substantiated this whole ordeal, then I would be on board. While I do appreciate the friendship between Guzman and Samuel, I do think that writers, if skilled enough, could go wherever they wanted with it. But honestly, regressing Guzman and then making Samuel and Guzman fight over Ari simply doesn't work. It doesn't help that Ari isn't really presented as someone to be worth pining over either. I am not even exactly sure why she appeals to either of them. She doesn't seem like a pleasant person to be around, nor does she really match either of their personalities on a level that would warrant them to be pining over her so much. Really, I wonder what does she even have for them to throw away their entire friendship besides being part of the main cast. Then we have the other triangle, Omar, Ander, and Patrick. Ander and Omar weren't exactly hashtag couple goals before this, but Season 4 really outdid whatever toxicity they had before. I have not much to say about this thing, whatever this was, because it simply hurts my brain. I do not want to see it. All three characters are equally boring to me. With these two triangles, Elite also focuses very much on sex, which to me was very excessive. See what you will, but the sex scenes from this season and forwards felt like a middle schooler laughing and giggling while putting their plushies in compromising positions. The one relationship that felt interesting, albeit a bit rushed, was between Cayetana and Philip. We all know that one quote from Cayetana from before. Philip felt like an unexpected but cool concept for Cayetana. I cannot say that what happened between the two of them, or rather what Philip did to Cayetana, surprised me. I kind of expected that they would take that route with him, since this is Elite. They don't always go for the glamorous archetypes. They find ways to twist characters. And I cannot say that him behaving this way is unrealistic either. He is a royal prince that was probably never told no. There's also a bit of an intrigue surrounding the prince. The siblings keep bringing up some sort of a secret to him, to which he always reacts quite nervously. We get some hints as to the nature of it. Ariadna tries to keep Cayetana away from the prince. The secret is that he sexually assaulted a young woman back in his home country. Again, sadly, makes sense within the context of who he is. The season also does something that previous seasons didn't really do. It has a villain. Yes, for the first time in Elite history, we get a character who can be completely qualified as a villain. The villain is Armando, the person who preys on Menthea. I would argue that what happens with Menthea is probably the most compelling part of the season. While others were having redundant and pointless drama over seemingly nothing, Menthea was actually dealing with something serious. She runs away from home and is in a vulnerable state. Armando sees this and swoops in, but then he, an adult man, proceeds to sleep with her. He is a predator. These sets of relationships are the main threads that run across the season. Yet for whatever reason, the show became allergic to actually providing cohesion between these storylines. They became very isolated and distant from one another. Characters just exist on their corners of the show without much overlap. This in turn makes a lot of what happens really incoherent overall. But you have to remember that we are also building towards a certain finale that is supposed to reveal how exactly the plot factors into Ari getting into the water. I will compliment this season's mystery on one thing. They tried to be different about the mystery this time around. The show attempted to do something unique. For instance, it didn't go for the murder, it went for a different sort of crime. Assault. And that is good. It is not feasible to always have murders happening at the same school all the time. Another way this mystery is different though is that the show invents deception this time around. Remember the flash forwards of the investigations? Of people getting questioned about what happened to Ari? As in, who threw her into the water? You see, the response to that question is actually, no one did it. She fell into it because she was beaten up and intoxicated. So whatever you saw in the flash forwards do not even help to form a picture and answer the question, because none of the people displayed in them actually did anything. Remember the intricate build-ups from the previous seasons? That doesn't happen because half the time the characters do not even interact with each other. So in a messed up way, it does make sense that no one really did it, because Ari barely interacts enough with anyone outside of her little triangle for anyone to actually build a motive to do anything to her. But there were two crimes in total committed that night. One of the crimes is that Armando beats Ari up, and the other is that Guzman kills Armando. And you would think that this would be an important part of Guzman's journey moving forward. Killing a person is not exactly a thing you can just move on from. It should have real repercussions, right? With this, the show throws another curveball. Right after the killing, Guzman actually exits the show. Needless to say, the season felt unnecessarily messy, fragmented, and meandering. After this, we have Season 5. The season starts off with two major storylines being kicked off. That is the storyline surrounding the mystery and the flash forwards, and Philip being exposed as an assailant. There are also a lot of miscellaneous things that happen which don't really fit anywhere. The season is where the show loses practically all of its marbles in a way. Most people see it as better than Season 4, and I do agree that in some cases it is, but it still is riddled with a lot of issues. Now, why do I bring this up now? Well, the season sees two new arrivals, two foreign students named Isadora and Ivan. I can see the purpose of one of these characters. Isadora is indeed introduced to serve some purpose, but I don't believe either of their introductions actually have a meaningful idea behind them. In the context of Elite, they do not bring anything new to the existing dynamic. While even the siblings stood for something, neither of these characters stood for anything. While having slightly different backstories, they are still largely rich kids, just like every other character. The existing dynamic within the school does shift though. Benjamin imposes stricter rules, more restrictions on the student body of Las Encinas. This seems like a natural progression after what happened to his daughter. Weird that the other students have to suffer due to his own incompetent parenting, but natural nonetheless. As a result of that, we also get a lot more rebelling from the three demon kids against their principal dad. And thus we are subjected to even more cringe parties than ever before. Also, this time around we get even more love triangles. One between Samu, Ivan, and Ari, another between Ari, Ivan, and Patrick. Wait, no, that's a whole square actually. Oh yeah, and also there is this weird thing between Ivan, Patrick, and Ivan's dad. I do not even have much of a commentary on this nonsense besides that it's insane and I don't want to even touch that. It's completely nuts, it's not even sexy, it's gross. Let's move on. Let us look at something a little more substantial. That is the mystery. I will say right off the bat, having the killer of Armando just exit the show is stupid as hell. It is actually stupider than just plain stupid. Because the plot of this season exists for the sole reason that they have to dance around the fact that Guzman is not around anymore. And as a result, you have this extremely convoluted plot that I guess kinda sorta makes sense, but just feels so off. So basically they retconned the last season a bit by establishing that Benjamin and Armando apparently had some business ties or whatever. Armando had some blackmail on Benjamin in a SIM card. Apparently Armando stashed the card in the phone that he gave to Mencia. So then the body of Armando that Samu, Rebe, and Guzman sink in the lake at the end of season 4 surfaces, because of course it does. Mencia also throws her phone at a random girl and accidentally discovers the blackmail against her dad. Then the police begin suspecting Benjamin as being the culprit. So Samu is then coerced into covering for Benjamin. Benjamin lies his way through the whole thing by promising Samu to get him out and then refusing to do so. Then Samu is approached by the police to become a mole for them in catching Benjamin because apparently they know Benjamin is a sketchy dude. Samuel then finds out about the SIM card and has Rebecca steal it. Then he goes to Benjamin and they get into a fight over the card, which is how Samu ultimately gets killed. There are a few pieces in the mystery that I do like. I do like that they play on the idea of Samu seeing Benjamin as a father figure that he never actually had. Their whole family actually begin running entire psyops on Samu once they realize that he can just hand over the father over to the police. They exploit his vulnerabilities and manipulate him for their own gain. They actually work as a family, as a unit, which in a messed up way is nice. I do also like how his children react when he begins justifying himself after the murder that he commits and trying to evade justice. They call him out immediately. What ultimately does make me dislike this mystery is that it was very obviously conceived at the last minute. It wasn't planned, and that becomes very obvious when you reconsider how they wrote Benjamin in the last season. When he was first introduced in the last season, he was meant to be unlikable. Then throughout the season, you kinda warm up to him. He is shown as a single struggling dad instead of a calculating monster of a principal. Then season 5 walks back on all of that and makes him very villainous again. Which granted, I can recognize that his killing is different from what we have seen before. We never really had a killer to be as conniving before. Paulo, Lou, Guzman all immediately regretted it and felt guilty. What I also don't like is that there is zero setup between Benjamin and Armando last season. The two of them shared a scene together, literally. It would have been very easy to at least imply something if this was actually planned, instead of pulling something out at the very last moment. moment. It is very funny to see episode 4 of the season begin with a flashback that gives Benjamin a character motivation against Armando just when the plot really demanded it, then see the present day of the body floating back up, and then see a flash forward of the backpack in the pool, and this all happens in the opening few minutes. There are also entire storylines and characters that are simply irrelevant to the mystery and have nothing to do with it. Ivan and Isadora, for all of their partying and making out, have barely anything to do with the plot. Same goes for Philip and Cayetana. In this way, the show follows the pattern of being all over the place and fragmented. I do appreciate that there was a bit more connection between the characters this time around, even if it only amounted to making out sessions and sex. But hey, the bar is in hell at this point. So, as I have said, there are two major storylines within the season. There was the mystery, and then there was another. The other side of the story focused heavily on three characters: Felipe, Cayetana, and Isadora. I will admit that it is very difficult to discern what exactly they tried to do with the storyline, but what they did was both absurd and a train wreck. They tried to focus on the topic of sexual assault. On one hand, we have Cayetana, a person who was assaulted by the prince. On the other, we have this brand new character of Isadora, who is a huge fan of Philip and goes to extreme lengths to protect him. And then we have the criminal himself. The show talks about moral grayness when it comes to his character. But first of all, let us establish something. Sexual assault is not in any way morally gray. By its very definition, it is morally wrong. The show attempts to tackle this topic through Philip and shows him getting bullied and attacked for what he did. I suppose they try to make a point that he is indeed human, but for me, the thing is that yes, he is indeed human. I believe that is what makes crimes like these extremely horrific, that a human can do something like this to another human. I don't think anyone ever doubted that he is indeed a human being just like the rest of us. They bring attention to this in a very arrogant way too. We have Cayetana, who tries to help him. She comes along with him to therapy sessions to talk it out. Evidently, those sessions do nothing on Philip, because he proceeds to bitch and moan to Cayetana.
Calle, lo que tú y yo sentimos es muy especial, pero no creo que nos lleve a un buen puerto, la verdad. Porque a ti te tiene encadenada la necesidad de cuidarme y a mí me tiene encadenada la necesidad de no defraudarte a ti.
And from this, it really reads as if the show thinks that Philip did a little whoopsie that really is nothing at all and is ready to move on. And it frames Cayetana as the one who is seemingly incapable of letting go. Cayetana really gets a lot of crap from Philip about this, as if it wasn't him who assaulted her in the first place. Not to mention the fact that we have a very unambiguous case with Elodie, who he admitted to assaulting. I cannot speak so much from my own experience, but I do think it comes off as insulting towards the actual victims who may watch the show, because the season fundamentally misunderstands that a crime like this doesn't really end after a person says sorry once, but has real long-term effects on other people. And also, Philip doesn't really seem like he understands what he did. Him whining to Cayetana is a real proof of that, and at one moment I actually thought that this might be the intention here. Isadora quite blindly protects him throughout this whole ordeal. She keeps calling Cayetana out, calling the prince's victims liars, and being all sorts of unpleasant about it. Apparently, she has this sort of kind of a parasocial relationship with him. She follows him on social media and basically tries everything to get his attention. There is an interesting scene between the two of them in episode 7, which goes like this. Here I sense that perhaps what the show attempted to convey is that maybe people like the prince really are the way they are, and that they don't really change. The prince is not exactly wrong in saying that he doesn't have to reciprocate what Isadora gave to him, but he does go the extra length to insult her. He comes off as a bit of a hypocrite and generally snobbish, because while Isadora's drug abuse is not great, she's not actively hurting others, while he is. Perhaps the idea here was to show that you shouldn't protect people like that to suck up to them, because they wouldn't see you any different from from how they view their victims. I thought that he could have used this moment as a bit of a wake-up call for Isadora and actually helped her see through the prince for the first time. That doesn't really happen. Then the show decides to flip the script on Isadora. She gets essayed herself. This feels rather harrowing considering the nature of Isadora's character throughout the show up until this point, that is of her standing up for an assailant. So, she has this terrible event happen to her, and I personally thought that she perhaps would change her perspective on things. And she does change her perspective, but not necessarily in the way I hoped. What all of this does is basically places Isadora in the shoes of the character she criticized the entire season, Cayetana, and you would think that she would change her perspective on Cayetana's situation and begin viewing Philip himself differently, because before this she was on his team, and you could argue that she was there by the show's logic because she herself didn't fully know what this type of experience entails. So now she has, she knows, yet she doesn't somehow see Philip any differently. She experienced people causing her pain through this experience, yet the show never really changes the dynamic between her and the prince, a person that put another person through the experience she herself now has went through. Now that they did decide to go this route, at least it would have been fruitful for Isadora to realize what kind of a person Philip really is, instead of having him, an assailant himself, holding her hand while she reported an assault that happened to her. The storyline gains another bitter undertone when you realize that they pit Cayetana and Isadora against one another over a criminal. At no point do they actually validate Cayetana. Isadora and Cayetana never have a conversation where it is acknowledged that what Cayetana went through was horrible and that her feelings surrounding it are valid. Instead, Cayetana gets invalidated and demeaned all season for what happened to her, and for her trying to help Philip. It also doesn't really help the fact that, when you think about it, both these women's storylines revolved around him specifically. They didn't really have much going on besides that, which is just really unfortunate, especially considering who he is. What is also unsettling about the storyline is that the original accuser, the person who exposed the prince named Elodie, is not really addressed afterwards either. At one point in time, I thought that this was perhaps supposed to be a redemption storyline. They might have attempted that, but a redemption storyline it certainly is not. Philip doesn't redeem himself in any way. Does he change his attitude? I mean, sure, he freaks out at people who assaulted Isadora, but he doesn't really address the situation with Elodie or Cayetana in a way that actually justice would be served. Paula, for instance, even if at the very end, had the decency to say that he will give himself into the hands of the police. The prince is a royal, sure, but we didn't really receive even a modicum of the same energy as we did from Paula. He continued to haunt Cayetana just fine while also whining to her. So, here comes season 6. I feel as though this installment of the show went into a bit of an overdrive in order to correct what occurred in the previous season. I do want to recognize that they did try to improve the situation. Once again, the show introduced villains, only this time those villains were the people who assaulted Isadora. But there are a few things that hindered this depiction. First being the unceremonious way they got rid of the prince. His victims didn't receive the justice that they deserved because they simply state that the prince returned back home, and it does stain the show. It would always be uneven moving forward, as the show treats one assailant in one way and others in another. This results in an abrupt change in character of Isadora. First, her whole obsession with Philip is dropped and never addressed again. And second, she's simply a different character from what we saw of her last season. The show does explain that there is a time skip in place between seasons, which I suppose does explain a bit as to why Isadora is different. Before, one of the main ideas behind her character was that she pushes people away and doesn't allow for others to help her. Yet, when this season comes around, all of that is seemingly gone. Again, I can see why this is the case. I can recognize the logic behind it. Yet I think it would have been beneficial for her character development to see her break down her barriers. With an experience like that, I think it would have been nice to see her perhaps learn to trust other people. It would have been only natural considering what she has experienced. In this season, there is another character that they introduced that gets involved in the storyline, Didak. The deal with his character is that at first he acts like a prick towards Isadora. He straight out tells her that she is lying because he's friends with one of the assailants, and he thinks his friend isn't like that. I do like that Didak, once actually encountering Isadora, does try to find out the truth and does express genuine remorse. While unfortunate that he didn't believe her before, he still corrected himself. He, along with other characters, help Isadora to get her justice at the end, and her assailants end up in prison, right where they belong, as well as the prince, as they should have. The season introduces a lot of other characters too. For some unknown reason, it has become a tradition in Elite that these characters are dropped in rather abruptly. A lot of the characters, such as Rothi or Nico, simply pop up out of nowhere, and everyone pretends like they knew them all along. That is jarring to say the least. This time around, these characters are used to introduce more sensitive topics. I tried to think long and hard how these ideas could relate to the grander picture of Elite. But honestly, I couldn't really come up with anything. The controlling ideas behind these characters and storylines was so jarring in comparison to the rest of the show that this season is the first season that I wouldn't call Elite at all. Season 4 had more to do with Elite than this season. I mean, it does have some of the same characters from the past seasons, but I am still not sure how it even fits. I think it could have been an interesting season. A season of introspection, of reflection upon the culture that Las Centenas fosters would have been interesting. When you think about it, in previous seasons the show had people who were scholarship students to blame and oppress. This time around though, there are no scholarship students. The main crime that is focused upon is that of Isadora's assault, a crime done by rich kids to another rich kid. Similar to Paula or Lou's crime in a way, but again, they don't have the poor kid's boogeyman to blame. I think it also could have worked with the leadership of Benjamin. After all, it is his leadership that brought a lot of chaos into the school. It could have been an extension of that, of healing after all of the destruction. In a way, it is. We have the kids of Benjamin grappling with what happened to their family, but besides that, there isn't really much that would go in the theme of that. There are also a few other things to like. The storyline of Menthea and Sarah I really liked, because Menthea this time around kind of reminded me a lot of Rebecca, so while Rebecca wasn't physically there anymore, I'd like to think that her spirit lived on through Menthea. And that is beautiful. I thought that Ari's grief over Samu was shown appropriately. She abuses alcohol to run away from her grief, but she does eventually face it. That too was nice. But this season does come with its fair share of issues. There are these smaller discrepancies. For instance, Sara is introduced as an influencer. She herself explains that
Bueno, solo he hecho una mano con la nueva imagen social de las encinas, porque ahora están muy a full con el tema redes, imagen del colegio y esas cosas.
But in her very first scene, she proceeds to trash the school by digging up all the recent events surrounding Benjamin and his children. You would think that if the school was aiming to fix their reputation, the person hired to help do that wouldn't go out of their way to dig up all these scandals as soon as she steps into the school. She does this repeatedly, which again is an odd choice considering why she's there. There is also the matter of Samu's death. He was killed by the father, yet he and the whole family get to drive off into the sunset. While I understand that the main idea would be that they are rich so they could get away with whatever the hell they like, we had this for at least 3 deaths already. It is particularly odd that there was absolutely no one who tried to get justice for Samu. Guzman didn't pop out of the woodwork, neither did Omar or Rebecca. That just feels unrealistic. Aren't they Samu's besties? There was no opposition whatsoever, and the dad was allowed to waltz off the show just like that. His children also seemingly just forget that their father is a murderer. There is also the mystery aspect of the show, because remember, the show still tries to pretend like it is a mystery. The main hook is, as always, presented at the very start of the season. We see Ivan being hit by the car and left on the road bleeding. This is probably the one idea that seems quite boring as a main mystery. Seeing someone just run over another person with a car doesn't really do much. Let us think on this idea for a moment. If we go by the mystery logic from the previous seasons, are we supposed to believe that someone had a motive to go sit inside their car and then decide to run over Ivan? Or do they just drive and then see Ivan hanging about and decide to run him over because of some beef? It wouldn't be the first time something like this happens in Elite, but at least before, it was in a random location and the person was chased. Not just Ivan exiting a building and the car just popping out through a happy coincidence. Also, I assume there are cameras all over the place. In addition to that, Ivan has quite some time to see that car, which is moving really suspiciously, yet he remains firmly planted in the same position. Couldn't he, like, maybe move or something? It's just the logistics of it sounds so very unnecessarily clunky. But this is what they chose, so let us roll with it. It was during last season that they already pretty much dropped the interrogation scenes for flash forwards. They existed here and there, but they didn't make up the bulk of it. This time around, they dropped them completely. They reached the height of stupidity with the way they present the mystery though. In a way, they continue the strategy established in season 5, which can be roughly described as random bullshit go. Last season, they decided to throw stuff together together these flash-forward sequences from different events in the future, and these flash-forwards are at least related to some type of a crime. This time around though, since the crime involves a car running over a person, they show various people sitting into cars. I have already expressed how stupid they are, and still, even now they are completely undeniably dumb. It would be the equivalent of showing people pick up knives if we had a stabbing victim. They also showed a coffin being carried out of a car, which I guess was supposed to be a little cute misdirect that is used to imply that maybe Ivan did die after all. But no, that turns out to be an unrelated event where Ivan's dad dies. This move is extra stupid, because the father's death isn't even the central mystery. Why are we being shown that event in this way? There is absolutely no reason for them to do this. Ultimately, the answer to the mystery is revealed to be that it was actually Menthea who hit Ivan, because she sat at the wheel without a license and under the influence. The show then devolves into a whole ordeal of Ari burning the car to protect Menthea, and because of that, Ari decides it is best to pack up and leave town along with their criminal dad. But actually no, this is not what happened. It is actually Sarah who did this and used the unconscious Menthea to cover up her own crime, which I will say is an interesting twist and does set up an interesting next season. But what they are doing here is similar to the crime committed in season 4. The crime itself, while kinda sorta teased throughout the season, has nothing to do with the actual season. This wasn't caused by a season-long build-up. This was caused by a chain of events that spanned like the second half of the last episode. So you have to suffer through these little snippets that basically serve as trailers for the next season's drama. In addition to that, what was even the point of convincing Menthea that she was the criminal? I guess this was supposed to be their convoluted way of writing the family out of the show, but they could have done that only with the crimes Benjamin committed. They didn't need this overly complicated twist to happen. I would understand if Menthea stayed for another season and they explored this dynamic of Sarah actively lying to her friend Menthea, but she leaves. They could have just jumped to Raul, helping Sarah to cover it up, and the result would have been the same. The season also ends with a cliffhanger. The school gets shot up. So with this setup, we may move on to season 7. Oh boy. So here is a fun little story for you, a quirky little anecdote if you may. When season 7 released, I saw quite a few comments on my channel of people wondering whether I would do a review on it. And initially I did plan on it, yes I did, but the truth is that I didn't actually finish the season at the time. That was why there was never a review on it, so a mystery solved for you over here. Do you want to know the reason? I will give you 3 guesses. Shoot them down in the comments if you want. But, there was something that made me stop completely. Something so potent, so powerful, that took me out immediately as soon as I saw it and realized what was going on. And you know, I survived the holy trifecta of weirdness that were Lu and Valerio, that chocolate scene, and Ari whining to Guzman and Samu that she likes them both. I was a veteran already. I thought there was nothing that could stop me anymore. But then happened... How do I call this? The thing... You know, the thing. Let us not spoil it just yet for those who had the wisdom to not watch the show when this season came. So, the season begins a bit after what went down in the finale of the last season. It also sees new characters enter the school. Along the new additions there are Chloe and Carmen, a daughter and mother duo who arrive in Madrid. At first, it is not exactly revealed why they have come there. As per usual, the new characters mix in with the old. Chloe attends school along with the rest of the cast. There is also Ivan. He is recovering after being hit by the car. Ivan begins interacting with Chloe. One thing leads to another, and the two of them end up in a bathroom together on the cusp of making out. Carmen, the mother, due to the plot convenience, happens to overhear them talking together and breaks them up. The reason for that is, as it turns out, is that Chloe and Ivan actually are step-siblings, and Ivan is Carmen's son. I regret to tell you that this will come into play later. Before we proceed, I would like to say that I do like the idea of Carmen and Chloe. I do like that they expand Ivan's lore. Finally, there were some characters that were at least relevant to something. Carmen is built up as a bit of a schemer, who uses her charms to get her way in life, which aligns with her inclusion in the season. It riffs off of the death of Ivan's father in the last season. Carmen goes out of the woodworks to try and get a piece of the riches that the father left behind, but she also wants to get to know her son. And she indeed does get to know him, I will tell you that. This is just, again, great. It is good that they finally want to build on something instead of trying to build something up and then moving on to the next underdeveloped idea. Like, that's good. Chloe as a character is also interesting. When she came along, she felt like the most elite character in a while. She kind of takes after her mother in a sense that she also uses her body to get attention. She leaks her own sex tape, yet she's also very nonchalant with other people. She doesn't take crap from anyone. Kind of reminded me of Lou. And all of that is great, until it becomes not so great. Good fucking God. I cannot believe I have to talk about this. Whew, okay. The show moves along, and Carmen gets closer to Ivan. Carmen also pushes for Chloe to get closer to him, yet neither of them really disclose the truth. They keep pushing the guy along. Then one evening, Carmen and Ivan drink together, and Carmen reveals that she actually knew Ivan's father, and you would think that she would finally stop keeping Ivan in the dark, and finally reveal the truth, but no. No, honey. The show instead decides to reach a low I didn't even think they would ever try to reach. It was so inconceivable, yet Ellie delivered it. And in a glittery font too. So the thing that happens is that the show displays Ivan and Carmen, a son and a mother, having sex. Oh God. Why? You cannot imagine just how fast I noped out of Elite. This is the one thing I still have no idea why they did it. Honest to God. What kind of use could this actually serve? This is the most unnecessary and out of the left field thing to have ever been unnecessary and out of the left fielded. Okay, let's move on, please. Thank you. Besides Carmen and Chloe, they also introduced a character named Eric. He's a cousin of Nico. We also have the return of Omar and a new character and Omar's boyfriend named Joel. There are a few things to glean from these new additions. Let's tackle Eric first. Eric is a bit of a continuation of the themes that began with a lot of the new characters last season, that is, tackling social issues. I think that with the character of Eric, it got just a bit too egregious. This time around, it is not only characters just talking about social issues. Now we also have protesting against the closing of a youth center, which is a bit hilarious, I will admit, considering that Eric then proceeds to go to Las Encinas, which is full of privileged kids who are the offspring of greedy 1%ers. This reminded me of the Gossip Girl reboot, and not in a good way. I think there is just something so weirdly jarring to see these opulent events and parties on display, and then to see these weird ways of the rich kids trying to achieve social justice. This season, there is no real overarching mystery, but there is a mystery element. So remember Omar? This season, for no real reason whatsoever, he is back. They build off of this little epiphany back in season 5, where he encountered Bilal and through helping him decided that he wanted to get into social work, which is great. At least there is some continuity there. Admittedly, I have zero interest in seeing his career, but the show is sometimes really good at giving us the stuff that we didn't even ask for, so here we are. In a very contrived way, the plot forces Omar back into the rich kid school to manage an app. This app is supposed to be a way for the students to submit anonymous messages if they want to talk to someone. Sometimes these messages become a bit like a mystery, as Omar tries to figure out who sent them. This, I suppose, is once more the show's attempt to sort of overcorrect the mess from seasons 4 and 5, but the idea itself really feels out of place in the show. Imagine someone from the before using this app. Imagine Lou using this app. It is only during this season that they somewhat begin addressing the death of Samu in a more meaningful way. Omar is shown as grieving and having a difficult time because of it, which I mean, finally someone decides to actually give a real shit about what happened. Omar doesn't seek justice for it though. There's also the new character Joel. He is boyfriend of Omar's, and I am happy to report that they bring Omar back just to insert him into another love triangle. Is that not lovely? Because in a very contrived way, they managed to connect Joel with Ivan. We are shown that Ivan is just hanging out alone, and then he has some food delivered by Joel, who at the time is working as a delivery person. Ivan invites Joel over to stay for the evening, and they have a little talk. Then Ivan decides after a single talk to try and pay to help Joel out with his future aspirations. On the surface, it would be nice, but this leads to a whole load of needless relationship drama that Omar once again becomes a part of. I was really ambivalent towards Omar throughout the seasons. I will admit that he was never really an interesting character to me. He seemed too whiny, and I found him a bit annoying. It was just something about his general demeanor that I disliked a lot. I also don't really think that the actor is doing that much of a good job, but him returning to season 7 felt like nails on a chalkboard. To have have to sit through the same drivel with him having these weird relationships is honestly so tiring. And if it is tiring to me, I have a question. Is it not tiring for the writers themselves to keep writing the same thing over and over again? Like, where is the limit? But the story that has most weight, I would say, is that of Isadora and Didac. In general, I do like these two characters as a couple. I thought their pairing was great. And I do generally like their story. That is, the two of them being part of these sort of opposing families and clans. This time around, their story very much becomes them being kept apart due to their families. They also introduce a detective character who works undercover in the school. He tries to collect dirt on the families of these characters. I suppose the only thing that I kind of dislike in this approach is that it reminds me a bit too much of Benjamin. Parents of rich kids engaged in nefarious dealings is not exactly something unseen in Elite. This season though, it is turned up to the 11. It once again strangely reminds me of the Gossip Girl reboot. I dislike how it sort of takes away a lot of the agency from the school and the students. On one hand, the story is evolving. They're trying to keep it different. On the other, the focus is shifting away onto the parents a tad too much. The student characters do not really serve as players in the plot, but more so victims of their parents' activities. There's also the Raul and Sara situation of it all. I can compliment the writers on how they continue to portray Raul. They really do nail him as a character. His actions are just perfectly quietly calculated. The way he manipulates Sara and then Chloe is great character writing. He's written as a pure villain, but I am not particularly mad about it. It fits his character. I like that Sara gains agency to get herself out of that situation. It's just that I think it is rather telling that Las Encinas has to spawn entirely new, never seen before school premises and a new irrelevant side character to service the story. It is personally a bit sad for me to say this, since I do see the value of these topics being given the spotlight. I can see how people can relate to this, and I don't want to in any way invalidate that. It is just that it is insanely out of style for Elite. This simply isn't Elite. The last episode of the season starts with a flash forward for God knows what reason. We are shown that someone dies. We then find out that the someone who dies is Raul. Carmen kills Raul because Raul has gotten her daughter under his thumb. This time around, they do a bit of a build-up towards this, and it doesn't come out of nowhere. Carmen is shown to read right through Raul, which kind of fits actually. She comes to Chloe one time and sees that she is being abused, so she begins scheming and gets to have a one-on-one on a rooftop with Raul. Then she proceeds to have the most cringe monologue before she pushes him off the roof.
Cuando una mujer te pide hielos y no tienes hielo, ¿sabes lo que haces? ¿Eh? ¿Lo sabes?
¿Sí? ¿Qué?
They also show a side character that was introduced this season, Delmar, managing to film the killing on his phone and thus having evidence against Carmen. With this cliffhanger, we march on to the final season, Season 8. Conceptually, there is a lot to appreciate about this season. For a final season, they return to the format employed in the earlier seasons. The show, just as before, begins with a flash forward. This time around though, they do not wait to reveal the deceased till the very end of the episode. With the very first scene, they reveal that Joel is the one to be the victim of the season. As they return to form, this is not too bad. They also introduce the Alumni, an organization that seeks to employ seniors of the elite school into their ranks after they graduate for connections. As an idea, I do not only like their inclusion, I actually love it. The idea of alumni lends itself as a great thematic choice for the last season, since we see the last term of Las Encinas. It is nice for the show to include an organization that focuses on students' lives after the graduation. The inclusion of Emilia and Hector also makes a ton of sense. Conceptually, they are the richest people Elite has probably ever seen. As a sort of final boss, it works beautifully. Finally, we get some rich brats that are not all about social justice and eager to get themselves into situations that are social issue coded. They felt the most Elite character since the original seasons. I think that similarly to season 4, there is an immense potential here to really shake up the existing dynamic. Again, the old cast become the underdogs, while these two rich kids can do whatever they can. There are pieces of the execution of these ideas that I also liked. So these new characters come in with their organization and offer memberships to the students of Las Encinas. In order to enter, the students need to be sponsored by a person who is already a member. This part is great. If the membership within this club is as beneficial as they claim it to be, it already lends itself to an interesting dynamic. Students may fight over it, which does indeed happen. Think of it as similar to the trophy back in season 1. Another thing that I like is that the alumni put their candidates through tests. A bit of a cliche idea, but it kind of works. Both Emilia and Hector make Chloe and Joel respectively go through such tests. They are not simple tests, they are more so psyops, and this is the stuff that really make Emilia and Hector compelling this time around. They play around with the existing cast because they can, and I really think that because of this dynamic, it is interesting to see what it all results in. Now, where I think it all fails is that the show plays their hand a bit too soon and a bit too openly. First, they really rush into introducing the alumni into the mix. I think that the season would have benefited from a bit of a slower approach. I would have preferred for them to take their time a little, allow for this new reality and dynamic to settle. I also would have preferred for them to play into the test aspect of it. Maybe make it a bit of a Hunger Games for those who want to join. Push them to be cutthroat. Make it a bit of a more twisted version of the race to the trophy from season 1, which to be fair, they do, but that doesn't really last as long as it could. From all of this, you can see how exactly things could play into the mystery. And speaking of the mystery itself, I think it also could have used some more chill on certain aspects. They reveal the victim quite fast, and they spend 0 seconds to display that Joel indeed really is the main character this season. And they do that in very awkward ways. As soon as he steps foot into the alumni, they display the rich kid staring him down like a piece of meat. Suddenly the whole narrative shifts towards him, Joel, which is not necessarily bad, but it does feel jarring in comparison to the previous seasons. I would have liked to see here just a bit more subtlety, that's all. I do understand why they have to have things unfold in this way. This is the last season, and they have to have one last mystery with a beginning and a resolution. Which I mean, what happened to setting up longer story arcs and paying them off over a few seasons? But I digress. Joel himself this time around really does remind me of Marina, which again, not a bad thing. I do think that he had to rush a bit of his character development, because beforehand, he wasn't really this arrogant or whatever he becomes. A lot of this new attitude is worked in there in the first 5 episodes that he is alive for this season. Again, I would have liked to see a more fleshed out version of this, but the idea is good. We get to see the riches, the money, and even some influence that is handed to him get into his head. From his new attitude, you can see how certain characters could gain a motive to kill him. And speaking of motives, I really like that they found a way to work in the cliffhanger of the last season, that is Carmen being captured on a phone camera killing Raul. What they do here is something that also reminds me of season 1. They have Joel blackmail Carmen, not too dissimilar to how Marina was involved in blackmailing Carla's father. This gives Chloe and Eric, who are together, a motive too. They also give Isadora some motive, as Joel's activities put her whole business in jeopardy. This, again, is great, makes sense, amazing. The thing that I thought was nonsense though is that they tried to pretend like Hector could have done it, because apparently he has an obsession. If they developed this better, maybe I could see it. I will be honest, I am not exactly convinced. And while there are a lot of pieces that are nice within this mystery, I really do dislike the main reveal. The show reveals that Joel was killed by Luis, the policeman that worked undercover in the school during the events of season 7. I dislike it for a few reasons. One of them is that he doesn't really have a personal motive besides Joel threatening him. To be fair, I think Joel was very fair in threatening him, but that as a sole reason to kill him? And we are not talking about just some accident. We are talking about this person coming in and slitting their throat. This killing doesn't really hit us close to home since it is not as personal, since it didn't really have any bigger setup. I also dislike it because this is literally the 5th season in a row where it is either A, the mystery is revealed to be either an accident without any prior setup whatsoever, or a random adult character swooping in to do the crime. You can really see just how much proper setup this mystery has when you realize that they show all of these flash forwards and none of them feature the killer, which really is giving deception on the levels of season 4. Which brings me to another reason why I dislike this reveal. That is because it is very similar to the reveal they did with Benjamin. From the way both of these characters were written, they were both written in their initial seasons to be more so on the good side. Benjamin was a struggling father who turned out to be maybe not as bad as initially thought. Luis was shown as working for the police who were trying to get justice, and in both of their second seasons, they were written with heavy villainous undertones. And also both of them were very obviously the killers. Now to be fair, the way Luis was portrayed portrayed in the 7th season can go both ways. He is shown to listen in on conversations between Isadora and Didac without legal approval. You can view this as him either doing this because he is a creep, or you can view this as him doing this because he wants to get justice and he is willing to bend the legal limit to reach that goal. I personally was under the impression that it was the latter and not the former. Season 8, however, left no question as to which one is the case. From the very first scenes when Luis told Isadora that he wanted to be her friend, you could feel the creepy. I guess the main difference is that Luis at least was very deliberate in his killing, and he overall was just a villain. I just feel like they could have had another killer, but they went with the most basic redundant one they could find. There could have been a scenario where all of this could have worked perfectly. Now, the way the show gets to the answer that Luis is the killer is through characters investigating. And throughout that process, a lot of characters begin to just straight up blaming each other, not without a sound foundation. A lot of characters look suspicious this season. I think that this idea overall would have worked way better if they did this sometime right after the first 3 seasons, because during those seasons, no one really did this. Characters didn't exactly go at each other's throats by blaming one another on this massive of a scale. They caught a suspect that everyone decided to pin the blame onto. It would have been a nice shake-up to the initial formula to say, actually, none of them really did it. I think that it would have potentially messed with audiences' expectations real good, since you would naturally expect for one of them to do this after seeing what has happened before. But as we discussed, they already used this out of the left field criminal more than once, which really does ruin what they have going in this season. What I also liked was that we see some scheming that reminded me a bit of Samu in season 2, as Isadora, Ivan and Sarah scheme to get Chloe's phone to see the video of the killer. So I think that one of the biggest sins of the season is having too many good ideas and mashing them together into a single 8-episode season. I think that all of what we saw during the season could have done nicely for at least 2 seasons. I do like that in general season 8's plot elements resemble those that were in the before. For a final season, dare I say it, they had a lot of great ideas. That is not to say there weren't some less than good choices made this time around. They brought back Nadia, which loved to see her as a character, but did we really need her? She didn't do anything substantial for the plot. I do like that she was there for her brother though, but I personally feel like we could have gone without dragging her back into this mess. The final message also didn't slay as much as they thought it would. Like some boomer, Omar goes on a little ramble online about how they should close the school because it has caused this much pain, which may feel thematically fitting, but the speech, especially coming from him, a person who has claimed he was so interested in social work, is kind of weird. He talks of the school as if the school itself is a living being and is cursed. I feel as though it would have been way more fitting to go into the opposite direction, to point out that the school has nothing to do with it. A school is a building, but the people that go there are the people who create a culture inside that building. Omar's speech just feels very childish and naive, honestly, as if closing a single school will solve anything. The last scene, admittedly, is great. We see rich students end up in a school that started it all. They go to the very same school that was shown to have collapsed at the very start of the show. And this thus closes the loop of the show. You see, the after leaves us at an interesting place. We live in a reality where the after comprises more of Elite's continuity than the before. The type of content on display during the seasons are actually what dominates this brand as a whole. In many ways, this is the ultimate picture that this TV show as a whole chooses to leave us with. And let me assure you, the picture it leaves is radically different from that which it first displays. While some may say that Elite never really changed its ways, I would dare to say the opposite. It has, most certainly. While there are some elements that may be perceived as similar, believe you me, at their core, they couldn't be more different. And since we have looked forwards from the original point of divergence, it would be most beneficial to also look backwards and to see the full picture of the show. Season 1, the season that began it all, starts with a flash forward. For the first time ever, we see one of the main characters, Samuel, being interrogated by a police inspector. The flash forwards reveal that quite a harrowing event is bound to occur, and thus with this in mind, the show transports us to the genesis of the story. The story begins as Samuel, Nadia, and Christian arrive at the prestigious school of Las Encinas for rich kids. Yet they are not just like other rich kids. They come from a humble background and they are on a scholarship. It is due to their status that the rich kids initially reject the scholarship students. But throughout the first episode, we begin to see the rich kids and the scholarship students mix. For Samu, it doesn't exactly go to plan, so for a brief moment he considers never returning to school. Yet Marina convinces him to return, and by By the end of the episode, we do see him return, yet we also receive another crumb of this forthcoming tragedy. We are also shown that it is Marina who is the victim. As the first episode, it is an incredible introduction. It represents a microcosm of the show. It sows seeds of upcoming dynamics and relationships that the show does indeed follow up on, and it is those seeds that then directly result in the eventual death of Marina. What I like about this season is that it is relatively down to earth. The main characters that we follow are school students, and therefore they actually behave like school students, or whatever that means for rich kids. What is also notable is that this cast of characters feels distinctly cohesive. Each character is connected to one another. There is some substantial backstory established, and characters actually feel like they have real connections. The victim herself, Marina, is slowly built up as quite a destructive person. Upon seeing a dead young person, one expects a certain level of innocence on their part, but that innocence isn't exactly found with Marina. That is a great play on one's expectations. That is not to say that there are absolutely no issues with the season. I believe that one of the larger issues overall is how they handle the character of Nadia. This might be controversial, but I do not believe that she should have been kept together with Guzman. It actually has been a while since I've seen season 1, therefore my memory of it was quite faded, but upon a rewatch, it feels almost grating to keep watching her interact with Guzman. Guzman, after being told repeatedly to leave Nadia alone, listens to absolutely nobody and insists on being around Nadia. This, of course, is born out of the weird obsession Guzman and Lou share over Nadia, because they want to supposedly humble her. I suppose it fits into the overall character of Guzman. He seems like the type of guy who would brute force into something even if someone says no. But this does come at the cost of the character of Nadia, because she repeatedly establishes her boundaries, establishes that she doesn't want to be in any contact with Guzman. Guzman repeatedly violates it, also repeatedly insults her and her family, but it is around episode 4 that the season gives a moment of enlightenment to Guzman. He realizes that his father, who he idolized, is not that better than the people he had been condemning. Since he now understands that Nadia might not be wrong about them, he does what he knows best, buys his way out of the situation. He gifts Nadia a hijab. What I dislike here is that this one moment is somehow supposed to wash away all of the racism and xenophobia throughout the season, as well as all the insulting situations Nadia had to go through due to these people. That is what the show implies, because it takes approximately one hijab and one conversation of Guzman finally admitting that he is kind of a piece of shit for Nadia to say,
No te merezco.
Ahora sí.
Nadia, I would say, falls way too fast for a person who does not deserve her at all. I would understand if they perhaps showed a progression of him improving, but it takes only that one conversation for the relationship between Nadia and Guzman to change in that direction. There's also Marina and parts of her characterization that I think are not properly paid attention to. The thing about Marina is that, when you think about it, her backstory is rather traumatic. There's an interesting tidbit about her past. She had relations with a person named Pablo when she was 14 and he was 17. This already allows us to understand that she has gone through certain experiences with an older person who basically used her, as she is a minor who cannot consent. They do not necessarily delve deeper into that part of the ordeal surrounding Pablo. Actually, Marina, who also got infected with HIV from Pablo, talks about it in a more so romantic way.
¿Sabes qué pensé cuando supe que Pablo me había contagiado? Es que, de alguna manera, ese secreto, esa cosa que compartíamos los dos, nos iba a unir más. Que gracias al VIH íbamos a estar siempre juntos. Eso sí que es estar enferma y ser imbécil.
I suppose it makes sense that she herself romanticizes this. After all, she is merely a 16-year-old high schooler. But I do feel as though the show itself kind of romanticizes a dynamic like this as well. Because this is not exactly the last time that this happens to Marina. It is a strikingly similar situation to her relationship with Nano. The show, I'd say, would like you to think that she is a troubled girl who gets herself into trouble all the time because she wants to be rebellious and not like the other rich girls. Which is partly true. But I personally would have appreciated if the show emphasized Marina being manipulated by these older men. Of course, Pablo himself wasn't an adult, but 14 and 17 years of age still poses some implications. In Nano's case, however, he was a full-fledged adult who got together with a teen and also got her pregnant. The show weirdly overlooks this edge within their storyline, and I do think that the season could have better examined what exactly led to Marina getting into these situations not once but twice. And by that I mean, these are massive oversights suicides on behalf of her parents, the main point of contention within her family is literally due to the situation that occurred with Pablo, but the show doesn't really do a lot to examine what led to that specific situation in the first place. And perhaps they don't do that because the show itself doesn't really view it as a problem? Maybe it has something to do with the age of consent in Spain, but still I don't think that a 20-something man getting together with a teenager, impregnating her and then planning to run away together is anything normal. While the show does a great job of establishing Marina as a problem causer for other characters, in this sense she really is a victim. So I am not exactly sure why Nano is scrutinized for everything else except for being with a minor. Besides that, the season is very engaging and also very cohesive. This is probably what I appreciate about it the most. Things come to a head in a very organic way. The famous shot of Marina walking up the stage to accept the award and the scholarship remains one of the most iconic shots of the show, because what she is facing are a group of people she has in one way or another jaded. One of them eventually kills her, which leads us nicely into Season 2. Season 2 begins with a flash forward. This time around we are shown a search party for a student who has gone missing. I think that this season quite nicely plays off of the plot points established in the first season, and this provides a very nice progression for the plot. It is revealed that it is actually Samu who has gone missing. Within this context, a potential disappearance actually makes too much sense. It is a great direction to go to. There is a lot to like about how the season unfolds. We have 3 new characters introduced: Rebecca, Cayetana, and Valeria. All 3 characters have something to bring to the table. The show goes through the usual. It shows the new characters mix in with the existing dynamic within the school. The show also takes some of the old characters in new directions. This is where some of the existing relationships either begin flourishing or new ones are established that would become quite iconic within Elite. The season also allows for a lot of characters to shine. I feel as though the season invests more time into character building, which is great. But there are some unsavory aspects of the season. There is also the whole ordeal between Lou and Valeria, which is just why? I can kind of sort of understand why they did this. I guess they want to show just how messed up rich people can be. There's also another potential intention here, which we will touch upon later on. Another point of contention for me is the mystery. The main reveal this time around is that Samu, along with Guzman, are playing a long con. Samu isn't actually missing, but he is hiding away to upkeep the illusion that he's missing. It is just a bit of a cop-out, and I am honestly not quite sure how I feel about that. In a grander scale, it is rather forgivable because it does achieve certain things, such as making Carla crack, but some parts of the setup for it are a bit weak. Throughout the season, the show establishes 2 possible scenarios. Either Samu was made to disappear by the goons of the crime lords, or whoever he is involved with, or Samu was dealt with by one of the rich kids. I will admit that as a narrative choice, Samu getting involved in some sketchy things is quite interesting, because if you don't recall, Samu criticized people around him a lot for doing things that he would end up doing in Season 2. It makes him a bit of a hypocrite, and also puts him at the very same danger that his brother was in Season 1. That's fine. But for me it feels weak as part of this overall mystery. It is because it was very obvious that he wouldn't be the culprit behind the disappearance, since there is literally a bigger plot at play, aka Marina's death. So while I understand the inclusion and the purpose, did anyone actually believe they would factor into anything? There are also other motives being established that are also a bit weak. The show tries to sort of hint that perhaps Valeria and Lou could have done it because Samu found out about their little escapades. But that was a bit weak, at least how they established it. Not on paper, it is not, but I will elaborate on this a bit later. Coming back to the main reveal, I am torn, because on one hand, it does make sense overall. The supposed disappearance was a pretend one with a purpose, but on the other hand, we get a lot of flash forwards of people getting questioned for a crime that no one actually committed. So it's kind of giving Season 4. Granted, the suspects sure as hell have motives and do look suspicious, but this is the first time that the show uses the no one actually did it reveal, so you can kind of be forgiving about this. The thing that I do appreciate the Season 4 the most, and I didn't expect this, is how it develops the friendship between Samu and Guzman. At the beginning of the season, it was inconceivable for them to become friends. The flash forwards also played on this nicely, but I think it was really well conveyed just how slowly Guzman came to realize that Samu might be right. There's a certain tragedy to see him realize that your childhood friend is the killer of your sister. That part I really liked. So, we get a reveal of the mystery, which leads us right into Season 3. This time around, the show teases another death. and by the end of the first episode, it is revealed to be Marina's killer, Paula. This might be the worst out of the 3 seasons, but that is not to say it is bad. It certainly is not, but it also doesn't quite reach the standards set by the previous 2 seasons. The show, as is now usual, introduces us to 2 new characters, Malik and Yarey. This marks the first time the show introduces characters that are simply useless. I feel as though they really added nothing of substance to the story besides serving as obstacles to the existing couples. As for the plot, the mystery itself, it seems to be quite a logical next step for the show. I mean, this character by that point became so problematic to the entire cast. The motives to kill him were already quite established. You also have to recognize the symbolic value of such an outcome, aka the death of Paula. Paula was a person who caused a lot of destruction by his actions, so it would make sense in a twisted way for his destruction to catch up to him in a way that kind of started it all. The part that I do not particularly like about that is the main reveal. They reveal Lou to be the main culprit behind the death. The scene of confrontation between the 2 characters, don't get me wrong, does seem nice on the surface. The way Paula talks to Lou is quite similar to the way Marina talked to him before he killed her, but everything else surrounding that feels a bit weak to me. First, Lou as the killer never really worked for me personally. I understand where they are coming from with this. I believe that he tried to go for just how much hurt she felt through the season and how much she lost. The season began with her being cut off from her rich daddy's money, so she had to compete for the scholarship. Then she kinda gave up on Guzman, but on the same breath, the episode showed that actually she was okay with this. At the end, Nadia won the scholarship and agreed to share it with Lou, so you would think that all in all, things are relatively okay for her, no? Well, what happens is that she and Nadia decide to make a statement about Paula in a speech where they are accepting a scholarship from none other than Paula's mothers. They say some really spicy things in front of a live audience, so naturally Paula's moms tell them that they won't be getting it after all, because of course. So are we supposed to believe that this is somehow one of the factors that somehow pushed her over the edge? This was very much her own doing regardless of what Paula did. Are we supposed to believe that after the entire episode devoted to her preaching that she doesn't need anyone, that Paula's spiel about her being alone somehow caused her to do the killing? Also, I really dislike how people are so quick to call her killing an accident. Neither Marina's nor Paula's deaths are actually depicted as accidents. Lou literally rammed into Paula head on with a sharp object. How is that an accident? It is not as if it was a whoopsie and Paula somehow fell onto a knife or something. I also just don't really buy Lou as the killer. For me, she always seemed way more collected and cunning than anyone else. She was always on top of her stuff. If things didn't go her way, she would get her way still. It just seems odd that she would break now, of all instances. The cover-up for the murder also comes off as rather hypocritical if anything. They bashed Paula for killing Marina and not confessing for it for so long, yet when Paula is killed, everyone is just fine with allowing Lou to get away with it? And despite these considerations, I believe that it is a fitting, suitable end of this grander storyline. It is a chapter closed, a cycle ended. So, after that, there is a confirmation that the show is renewed for season 4. There are many paths that the show may take moving forward. We receive character portraits, a date announcement, a trailer, the short stories. Nothing seems off track, yet still the winds changed, the tides turn, without and within. So begins the after. The downfall still comes, yet why? Oh, I already told you that, have I not? The answer to that question isn't just a mystery. It is the mystery. Tell me, what is a lead, first and foremost? At least a portion of people would argue that it is a teen drama, which is not a wrong answer, but it is only a partial answer at best. I want you to think of how exactly a lead begins. With Samu walking through what turned out to be a crime scene, with the inspector talking.
Tranquilo. Todo va a ir bien.
This is where the narrative begins. As the inspector asks these questions, it is only then that we slip into the narrative that could be titled teen drama. This is not simply a story of teenagers experiencing high school. This is a story of a killing. It is within this mystery narrative that questions are raised, and the answer happens to present itself in the form of a teen drama. Without the questions, the answers wouldn't need to exist. The show operated best when it understood these basic tenets. What happened within the point between the before and the after, the inflection point, is that Elite forgot these tenets. Instead, it placed the teen drama first and mystery second. It provided answers first and only then asked the questions needed. In simpler terms, it began to provide needless teen drama without fully justifying it within the context of Elite. They simply began getting it backwards. Every flaw you see, every missed opportunity that you can detect, every nonsensical plot you may see unfold, all of it can be explained by this exact mistake that Elite makes. This weird switching of priorities and the fundamental misunderstanding of what Elite used to be. There is ample evidence to suggest exactly that. Let us now think of the characters that they introduce. A good point of comparison could be the characters of Cayetana and Ivan, a social climber who goes so far as to like to get ahead, and a rich kid who happens to be a son of a famous football player. The character of Cayetana, as a basic concept, already lends itself beautifully towards constructing a mystery. You do not need to do any mental leaps to see how exactly she could be motivated to potentially contribute to a crime. This is precisely the edge of the character that is used within the show. It is within season 2 that we see her develop a relationship with the killer of Marina, Polo. It is pretty clear that while there may be some genuine feelings involved, there is still an ulterior motive at play. Cayetana seeks to gain an advantage in life through her relation with Polo, which in turn makes her allegiant to Polo, and thus in the eyes of the audience, more prone to have a stake and a motive within a mystery. In contrast, we have Ivan. Ivan, for all intents and purposes, has little to nothing to do with the mystery during which he is introduced. This is not entirely a slight towards Ivan. I can see a certain appeal. He does have a purpose, presumably. They introduce him and give him a bit of a self-discovery journey, as he goes on to discover that he is bisexual, and ends up as an item with Patrick. Self-discovery and exploration of sexuality are certainly relevant to the intended audience of the show, teenagers. Therefore, you can see the logic here, which is exactly my point. It does only contribute to the teen drama aspect, yet Ivan is not in any way utilized in the ordeal surrounding Samu's death. Let us take it a bit further. Valerio and Isadora, a bit closer in spirit than Ivan and Cayetana, yet this comparison is equally as striking. Valerio, while bringing in a bit of a pep to the show, also brings something else. Let us think of who he is, because he is not just a party animal, he's also a step-sibling to Lucretia, and the two of them share a secret. Within the context of season 2, you can see how exactly having a secret may lend itself towards the central mystery, and once more, the show makes exactly that leap, because it is Samu, the person who allegedly disappears, that finds out the secret, which in turn gives a stake for maybe less so Valerio, but definitely Lou. Do I think that this was executed to the maximum potential? No. One of the more interesting details about Lou and Valerio is that their father is a diplomat. He is an ambassador. I think they could have played up this aspect a bit more, because I assume that since their father is an ambassador, he is in the public eye, and if a secret like that would come out, it would cause some real damage. The way it is presented in the show is relatively low-key, which renders the motive for Lou and Valerio also a bit weak. But as we have just discussed, there were definitely better avenues to take the storyline further. Isadora, similarly to Ivan, doesn't serve a purpose within the mystery. Her story is more so focused on pining over the prince and being an influencer and generally a rich girl. With Valerio and Cayetana, you can quite easily see how exactly they factor into the full picture. You can understand the reasoning behind their existence. With Ivan and Isadora, as much as you may like them and enjoy their presence, they do not have the same strong justification to exist. There's also the matter of relationships. The before took a pragmatic approach towards them, while the after went with what would supposedly be hot. One of the main statements to try and justify certain choices in the after is that Elite was always sex positive, and it always had sex scenes. Therefore, it is completely normal that we have a lot of sex scenes in the later seasons. I believe that there is a drastic difference between sex scenes in the before and the after. Not all of them, but there is enough substance to establish a difference. Let us take two threesomes, Carla, Polo, and Christian, as well as Patrick, Omar, and Ander. If you look at the former, you can see while there is still plenty of sexual content, it is usually also preceded and followed by some allusions to the social status disparity between Christian and Polo and Carla. It is a very explicit theme that is wrapped around their threesome, and it makes sense. Christian is not too dissimilar from Cayetana. He also seeks to up his social and financial standing. Therefore, to an extent, he has a stake in continuing his relationship with these people, which in turn also makes him have a stake in the mystery of season 1. You can see how exactly he factors into the entire equation. When I see sex scenes between him and Carla and Polo, I do not necessarily see the supposed hotness. I see a power play and exchange. I do not see the same with the other threesome. The way the show frames it is as Omar and Ander exploring their fantasies, which admittedly is also one of the motivations for Carla and Polo, but at least with them, it had way more interesting connotations. With Patrick and the other two, there is nothing more of substance. They are exactly that, an exploration of fantasies, which in turn does appeal to the teen drama aspect of it. Can you see the pattern here? There are two vastly different mentalities at play here, two very different philosophies that seem to be clashing. If you need any more convincing, allow me to bring your attention to Carla and Samu. Apologies for bursting your bubble, but the two of them were not paired up because the writers thought they would be hot together. The show itself very plainly points that out. Samu approaches her because he sees her as an in to get the answers he needs to who killed Marina. When I see them, even the sex scenes, I do not see merely shallow purpose to be hot. I also see a relationship established, a connection made, a potential motive being formed. That is where the show excelled, when it viewed every action as a move within the chessboard, before it treated characters as chess pieces to be strategically placed within a grander story. Think of exactly who they introduced in season 1. The 3 new characters coming into the school are not just 3 new characters, they are an entire world of connections coming in and clashing with the existing world of the prestige school. The rich pen of childhood friends, siblings, connections, couples, everyone is in some way related to someone. Same goes for the not rich characters. Each of them are in one way or another connected, but these are not just any connections. They are potential motives, they are potential stakes. Barely any of this exists in the after. Characters are more disconnected than ever. Nothing is cohesive, nothing is coherent, everyone exists within their own little bubbles unaffected by anything that happens outside of them. If you are still not convinced, we may also look at the flash forwards themselves. The flash forwards that you see, these mysterious glimpses into the future, they are meant to serve a couple of functions. Firstly, they are intended to show that you are following a journey that is heading towards something. There is a promise that is being made to the viewer that what you are watching will lead to a payoff. This type of storytelling relies way more on the journey rather than the destination. It also sets a particular tone. You are not watching just a teen drama. These interjections announce and reaffirm the genre of this TV show. The use of this type of format also brings an interesting challenge, because it frames the story. The story that is being told within this framework should, in one way or another, be relevant to the scenes that frame the story. This, I think, is pretty crucial point to understand. They are not supposed to give character storylines just because they want to give them these storylines for no reason. They are building a case against these characters. I believe there is a reason as to why we get to see these interrogations of various characters, a reason why these shots are framed so up close and personal. They are talking to an investigator, yes. They are talking to you, the audience, too, in a way. While in some other murder mysteries, you follow detectives who help guide audiences to conclusions, this doesn't happen here. The job of figuring out the truth is shifted onto the audience. The show is giving you a puzzle in pieces, and it is up to you to piece it together before you can see whether the way you pieced it together is correct. You can see this exact mentality at play in the very first season. These flash forwards focus on certain events that happened in the past concerning Guzman. The most notable event is the incident with Pablo. What is being done here is not simply the show introducing additional lore. No, this is being used to establish a pattern with Guzman. Guzman is shown as rather compulsive and brash, and also aggressive. This event is used to paint that picture in regards to the crimes committed. And this is an interesting leap that the show chooses to make. It uses certain characterization to make suggestions, to steer the viewer along this investigation, to present additional evidence for consideration. You can view this in another way too. They are characterizing Guzman in this way because, again, this type of characterization serves a purpose within the mystery. They tried to do something similar with Patrick. There were a few moments where the camera would zoom in, suggesting something going on with Patrick, and then he would lash out in anger. Patrick is shown as capricious, which would also serve a purpose within the mystery of season 4, only difference being that this is probably more so a happy accident rather than the real intention judging from the execution. Returning to season 1, this philosophy also extends to some other characters. We see Carla blatantly lie about her friendship with Marina. She tells one thing, while the past suggests something else. These types of showings carry various implications to build these cases against these characters. Most importantly, they have a purpose. Season 2 in its flash forward steer away a bit from the interrogations. It also shows things outside of them, but for the most part, it makes sense as we still follow the detective. Season 3, however, is the first season that begins a terrible pattern within the show. It still had interrogations, but then it began including flash forwards that simply should not have been included. The show begins to use these flash forwards beyond their original purpose, and in my view, beyond any reason. But it is season 4 and forwards that the show completely misunderstands the flash forwards and their original intent, and quite frankly, this is where they begin serving no purpose. You may wonder why exactly I keep harping on the mystery. Well, I believe that it is easy to underestimate just how much having a mystery and focusing on a mystery really helped the show. And I am not talking about keeping the audience invested. I am also referring to the writing process itself. There is quite a common piece of advice in mystery writing, that the writer should know the ending and the culprit of a mystery. It is also better to engineer a mystery backwards, from a single point of cohesion and to flesh out the plot. I believe that this rule served the show to a great extent. The first season distinctly feels as though it had this mentality controlling the narrative. The other two as well, I would say, because the elements introduced feel very specifically directed towards that one specific outcome. This is why the first few seasons are so cohesive and harmonious, because everything worked in order to contribute to that specific picture. It had only one intention in mind: to contribute to the mystery. To have that outcome, that idea of the killing, also means to have an endgame and a purpose in mind, an anchor in a way. These are precisely the things that later seasons lack. They simply lack narrative purpose, they lack that endgame. There is very little within these seasons to indicate that they have a plan in mind. I will concede that there is a certain logic to the direction later seasons take. The focus on sex, on relationships and drama, these are seemingly why Elite is popular. But make no mistake, the relationships that were formed and became so popular, these characters that became so popular, that was a byproduct more than anything, a byproduct of the central mystery to which they were made to contribute. Again, Samuel and Carla were matched because that was what the mystery needed. Cayetana, Valeria, even Rebecca were all introduced because they were just other chess pieces in the mystery. What makes the original relationship so compelling is that they are complex due to the mystery and the plot they exist within. It seems as though during the later seasons, the writer's room saw this and thought that it is inherently the relationships themselves that draw people in. Partly yes, on the surface this is true, but they began focusing on the byproduct rather than on what made the show initially compelling. It only makes sense that the show became incoherent. It didn't have an endgame in mind. It forgot its purpose. It forgot to have a reason for its existence. When there is no end goal and no further thought put into the writing, we get exactly what we got in the later seasons. A show full of storylines focused on mindless fun riddled with character inconsistencies, useless side characters and plots. The later seasons forget the underlying principles that made the initial seasons work. They begin approaching the show itself backwards. The mystery, before being central, afterwards becomes secondary, which ultimately causes the rest of the show's pieces to fall and falter. And this is exactly how Elite met its downfall.